Good evening and welcome to the PoliticIt podcast. We're honored tonight to have Kera Birkland. And, we just come off a legislative session. You probably, we're head of one of the, I don't know if I'd call it controversial, but certainly one bill that people were watching, right?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely watched and perhaps controversial.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. People ask me, well, why did you vote for that? And I said, this is not about transgender rights. This is about saving women's sports.
Absolutely. All along the way, it was this idea of a commission, right? What do we do to preserve women's sports, to preserve the integrity of it by making sure that there's not unfair competition? And all along the way, the transgender community at large fought it, harassed me, just acted like this was just a horrible thing to do because somehow, for some reason, you can't preserve women's sports anymore while still trying to be inclusive of transgender individuals. You either have all or nothing. And if you have all, the women's sports is left with nothing.
Well, and the fact of the matter is women can compete in men's sports, right? Transgenders can compete in men's sports. Anybody actually can compete that can compete, right?
Correct. Right.
And it was specifically set up to give women a chance to compete at a high level, right?
Title IX, we're at our 50th year. This June will be 50 years of Title IX, which was all about making sure that women had a fair place to compete, that it was just like the men's, but for their own selves, for women, because women and men couldn't compete together.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because you see this thing at Penn State now with a swimmer and broken every record.
Yeah. Right?
And those are records that women will probably never beat. Yeah. It's possible, but I don't know. And it's sad to me, really.
Yeah.
Because that's been a great thing for women, I think.
Well, John, for me, the hardest part is nobody is talking about the impacts this has on women, on girls. We're talking about teenage girls, college girls. And unless you're a woman and an athlete, you don't understand. Just being a woman, you're expected to be a certain way. You're expected to look a certain way, be a certain size. You become an athlete, and that just intensifies. You have to not only look beautiful while you're out there competing, you have to be the best, and you have to be so in shape. And they put themselves through such rigorous training to be the best. And then when you bring in someone who is just biologically and physiologically just going to be able to dominate them, they can't compete with that. And so when we talk about how this is affecting people, yes, we want to be mindful of the needs of the transgender community. Absolutely. But nobody is talking about the needs of women. Nobody's talking about the needs of these girls. And the message we're sending to them that, you just are going to have to figure this out on your own. Because
right.
Transgender kids, the girls are going to come play with you and get over it. They're raising that bar to where girls just can't compete. And they will push themselves to the point, unfortunately, we're seeing in some states where they, die by suicide.
Yeah. Yeah, and, that's always the first thing they say. Well, if you don't let transgender women go play sports, then they're going to kill themselves, right? It always comes back to that.
It does. It's that compassion. They want to beat you with compassion. You're not compassionate enough if you do this. But no one's sitting down and saying, okay, 16, 17, 18-year-old girls, where are you at on this? And I'll tell you, they're compassionate girls.
Yeah.
They have a lot of love for transgender kids and all kids. But no one's listening to the amount of pressure that they're under to get scholarships so they can pay for school. We tell girls, you can go and be and do anything you want, but we still hold them back as a society. But sports was a place where they could go and excel and get an opportunity to get scholarships. And those are going to start going away one by one when we let this just get out of control.
So what led you to do this?
Well, I started being interested in this just because I'm a mom. I have 3 daughters. And then
and your daughters are involved in
sports?
sports?
Yes, they are. And then I became a high school basketball official, and I started noticing the difference between a girls' team versus a boys' team. The physicality was just different, right? And so you become a varsity women's official sooner than you become a varsity men's official. And that's just because of the physicality. I officiate football, and you just see there's a few girls who have tried out for the boys' football team, and I've officiated them. And there's a massive difference for the most part in the ability of these girls versus the boys on the football team. And then when I became a coach at our local high school, I realized, gosh, we're
So what do you coach?
Basketball. I coach basketball, the JV team, and I assist the varsity.
And this is the women's team?
Mm-hmm. We're not serving our girls as it is right now. They're kind of treated already, still to this day, like second class in a lot of ways. And yes, it's true that the NBA gets more viewers than the WNBA. And so we've got to make sure we keep in mind that people just don't love girls' sports as much as boys' sports. But that doesn't mean when the tax dollars are going into our high school athletics that we shouldn't try to keep it as equal and fair as possible. It's taxpayer funded. Make sure it's equal and fair. And so I had girls coming to me saying, hey, so-and-so has this transgender kid on their team, and they're talking about it, and they're concerned about it, and they're aware. And it kind of just seemed like everyone's like, we'll figure it out when we cross that bridge. And that's very much the attitude, is when there's a kid that dominates in our state, we'll address it.
And I've heard this come back to me. They said, well, of course, this was changed right at the end, and why don't you send it into an interim and work out the details of it and just be more reflective? And, from what I've read, when you started this, there was maybe one or two transgender people in sports in Utah, right? Mm-hmm. And now, last year, there were, how many, 11 or 12? Or
that I'm aware of. So last year, there were 0 kids who went through the Activity Association policy as a transgender athlete. This year, there are 4. From 0 to 4 who've gone through the policy in 1 year. And then I know of about 6 to 8 others that I just know of that have come, and I've either talked to them or their parents or been made aware that.
And so this is a problem that the longer we wait,
the more kids it's going to affect. And not just the transgender kid, because that's a misconception. I kept hearing this is 4 kids. Well, it's more than 4, but let's say it's only 1. Let's say they're on a swim team or a volleyball team or a basketball team. That's a team of 10 to 15 girls playing twice a week against teams of 10 to 15 girls. That's 30 to 40 girls impacted, and nobody's asking them, what do you think? How do you feel? And when I do that and I ask them, they're very hesitant to answer. They don't want to be named bigots. They don't want to talk out loud about it. But the truth is, they're not okay. They're not okay playing with transgender athletes because, number one, they don't want to share a locker room with them. Not because they're fearful, not because they're mean-spirited. It's just they're not comfortable. That's why they separate the girls' locker room from the boys' locker room. And they're not comfortable right now, and we shouldn't just shove them into it. Now, first of all, we talk about grooming, and we talk about girls learning the right refusal skills, but then we tell them, go be comfortable in the boys' with a transgender girl in your bathroom. It doesn't make sense to girls. So there's so many questions and so much confusion and so much frustration. It's not compassionate to the girls or the transgender girls to just say, go do it, go figure it out, because we don't want to be the people that tackle this issue for you right now.
Yeah, and that's what makes this a tough issue because I know you fairly well, and I know that you're not a bigot. You know what I mean? And I see the people in the Senate that when we were discussing this, people were very careful about that. But I think there was a genuine concern in what's the end game. In my mind, the end game is there's no longer women's sports.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
That everyone competes on the same team, and they're welcome to join the team. And
it's true. And there's concern right now. There's a discussion of some athletes that are transitioning, and they want to play on some girls' teams next year. And girls are pretty concerned that, first of all, we kind of want them on our team because we want to win, but we don't really want them on our team because, honestly, a lot of other teams, and I talked to a lot of coaches, they said, we'll just walk out. We won't play. If you have a 6'6" transgender athlete on your volleyball team or your basketball team, we won't show up to play. And what does that do for the girls, and what does that do for that transgender kid? If we don't have the right guardrails in place, if we're not addressing this issue, we actually do more damage than trying to deal with it head on.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. I know there was serious debate in the Senate, right, about this issue, and it was interesting. I actually kind of liked the bill that you had worked on with the commission, and really basing it more on physical characteristics than what your sex was, right?
Right.
Or your gender, right? Yeah. So I liked that. It seemed reasonable in the way you were taking it together. But I think there was a serious. There were a lot of people on the outside that were upset that this wasn't just a ban.
Right. Well, it was, a tough issue because on one hand you had the transgender community at large who just fought it. They hated it. They didn't think there needed to be a commission. I mean, some of the most graphic and horrible cartoons and illustrations were, drawn up of this commission. Like it was this evil idea, which it's not, because we have several commissions in sports already who kind of handle these issues for different groups of kids. But number two, it was thoughtful of how do we provide a path to play while still preserving women's sports. But then again, a lot of Republicans didn't like it because it didn't do enough. And so frankly, I don't blame the Senate. When you have the left, let's just label them, carefully, but realistically, the left saying, no, this is wrong. A commission is not the right approach. We don't want anything. And then you have the right saying, this doesn't go far enough. Well, why would you pass that bill? There was no consensus. And I think that's what people are not understanding is there wasn't consensus on the bill. We talked about it and we understood that if you just had a ban, it would get litigated and then you'd be left with nothing. So the commission was a route to actually preserve women's sports.
Right.
But when they realized, a lot of the senators, and you may have been involved in some of those conversations, that we could actually add the ban to the commission, now we've frankly had a really good policy. It's just unfortunate that it did come at the last day.
Right. Yeah, and I was in a position where I was for preserving women's sports. I didn't care how we did it,
right, necessarily,
but I do know there was a lot of pressure from the right put on many people to say, no, we need to ban this. We need to stand up for women.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, it was an interesting conversation. And for people to say there wasn't a lot of thought put into it is absolutely wrong.
No, it's funny. I get so many people that will reach out and say, well, why don't you do just a transgender league? Well, the reason for that is because when someone's transgender, they're either transgender male or female. And they say, I'm a woman, I'm a transgender girl, I'm a girl, put me on the girls' team. They don't want to play on a transgender team. They say, well, go XX or XY chromosome. Well, then we have to blood test every athlete. We didn't want to even COVID test every athlete. Yeah. Do you really think we want to blood test every athlete, right? I mean, there are complications to it that I think people just didn't realize were explored, but they just weren't feasible at this time.
Right. Yeah, I really hate the pundits on the on either side that say you guys didn't think about this very much, right? This was, and I know you've thought a lot about it, and had many conversations with everybody you could, right?
Everybody. I mean, I had parent group meetings. The hard part and the most interesting part was it was hard to get parents of the cisgender girls to show up. We had a lot of the transgender community and LGBTQ advocates show up, but a lot of just the parents, they didn't necessarily want to come because that's the problem, that toxicity that's in our environment right now of if you have a different view than me, you're a bigot.
Yeah.
We can't just sit down and say, hey, look, I get that you really want this bill to pass, but this is how it affects me, and vice versa. That's not allowed in our society anymore without, they want to cancel anyone and everything. And that's not just the left. The right does it to a degree as well. Yeah. But on this particular issue, I have talked to countless athletes, both in high school and in college and beyond, who are scared to death. They will lose their endorsements. They will lose their scholarships. The girls swimming with Leah Thomas were bullied to be quiet for the longest time. And finally, they just couldn't take it anymore. At this point, if things don't clean up in the NCAA, most of those women have said they won't let their daughters participate in sports because of what it does, how it makes them feel, and how unfair it is.
Yeah. And I think that's the big issue right there, really, right? What is fairness to women? Why did Title IX come into being, right?
Right.
What was this all about?
Yeah.
I mean, on its surface, you could say, well, that was a sexist rule, right? Let the women try out for the men's team.
Right. But what happens when you do that? And that's been suggested multiple times. Just have a varsity team, and whoever can hang at the varsity level gets to make the team. Like, you don't realize at our high school, our boys freshman team can come in and play our varsity team and dominate our girls varsity team.
Yeah.
Like there's just a biological difference.
Right.
And women need to be proud of their accomplishments and their elite athleticism without being trying to compete with men and being compared to what a man can do. They need their own sport to shine.
Right.
For decades, women weren't allowed to participate. They were told that they couldn't actually physically run the mile. a marathon. They actually said the first woman who ran the marathon had to prove wrong that it was just not, they said, not possible for a woman to run a full marathon. I mean, can you imagine just because you're a woman being told that you can't do something physical? It's a huge barrier, something that we have worked hard, and I feel like, I haven't had to do as much as my mother and my grandmother. We've got to keep working on these issues. Otherwise, they don't stop.
Yeah,
they don't get better.
We either, if we're for women's sports, we need to be for women's sports, right? Because the end game, if you don't do that, is that there are no women's sports, right?
Yeah, and people are like, oh, it's sports. Who cares? Who cares? It's just sports. Sports bring in so much money around our world. I love it when people are like, well, it's just sports. Who cares? I'm like, well, a lot of people care about sports. Let's talk about how much money is spent into that industry. Sports do matter. Number one. Number two, it's not even just sports. Did you know in our state and around the world, women who leave sports on average are more likely to commit suicide than women who never did? Because that's where they get their identity. That's where women come and feel like they are now somebody. Because in our world, unfortunately, a lot of times women are still not treated equally as men. And it's just what it is. And we can just overcome that. But sports is an avenue to do that. So when women leave sports, they now are all of a sudden feeling like, where's my identity? Who am I? I'm not important anymore now that I'm not an elite athlete. And they're more likely to commit suicide than any other segment of women out there. And so when we start to take away their sports little by little, we're actually taking away the ability for women to identify as strong, capable, and that they matter. We're taking that importance of mattering in some way away from women.
Interesting. Yeah, I just see the consequences of not doing anything. And we had those conversations.
Yeah.
Right. And in the Senate, there were really very serious conversations about things like that. Well, what's the end game under each scenario, right? What finally happens?
Right.
And I personally believe the end game is there is no women's sports anymore.
Right.
And what does that do?
Right. It takes away opportunities for scholarships. There's girls in our state right here in Utah who only went to college because they had a scholarship. That's the only way. And they were the first one in their family to go to college, right? Especially some of these girls who just, they have a talent and they have an ability. And we're just basically saying, yeah, that's great, but you're going to have to figure out something else. And that's, people are like, I don't get sports. I don't care enough about sports. And that's fine. I understand you don't care about sports. But don't disparage that matters to them just because it doesn't matter to you. A lot of the criticism is, oh, this is just sports. Maybe focus on the gender pay gap. Well, let's focus on the gender pay gap. Do you know that most all of our CEOs and Fortune 500 company women played sports? If you want to talk about fixing the gender pay gap and fixing, issues with women not being treated equally, the majority of the women who are fighting those battles participated in high school sports. So if you want to fix women's issues, you better have sports there to help develop these women.
Interesting perspective. We're talking to Kera Birkland, and we're going to be right back.
I'm Kera Birkland, and I'm running for House District 4. It's true, I take on hard issues, but I do it because I care about the people in my district. I'm not at the Capitol to be important. I'm there because I want to do important work.
Welcome back to the PoliticIt podcast. We're talking to Kera Birkland, and Kera, I just have to say, way to go. I mean, I found that fear drives a lot of people drives them away from doing the right thing. Yeah. Absolutely. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the other side of this and what causes that fear and why, how people react to what you're trying to do?
Well, I think, on the surface, it seemed like there was a coalition that had been created to address this issue, and how can we bring everyone together and create a compromise. But behind that was this massive group of transgender advocates and just this community of people who just have trashed me, which I understand. I'm an elected official. I have to have some skin in the game, and I have to be willing to handle it, and I can. But I could honestly create a website, and it would probably get banned for its content, because most of the things are just so horrific. And that's why people don't step up and speak out, because we have grown freaking men speaking to women who are just doing what they believe is right in a way that is vulgar and violent and threatening, and they think it's okay. And a lot of women, why are they going to do that to themselves? I had a lot of girls that said, hey, I'll come testify. I was like, I don't really know if you should come testify about this bill. I think there's going to be some pushback. I don't want you getting targeted too. I had created a video with my intern, and I deleted the video because I realized she started getting targeted, on social media. And that's just wrong, because you have a different view and opinion. You should not go out there and just try to destroy someone's life, try to get their employer to fire them because they're, somehow this bad person, when really, honest and truly, John, if we do nothing, we do as much harm to transgender girls as we do to cisgender girls, because this is not an issue that's going to go away. We had 0 last year that went through the Activity Association policy, and 4 this year. Next year, it could double, triple, who knows? Every time a transgender athlete takes the court, the field, the track, the pool, whatever it is, and they do well, someone's going to be angry about it. Girls are going to be upset by it, because there's really no guardrails in place. There's really no public buy-in or support for how this should be handled. And so when we started the commission process, it was kind of quiet in the beginning. And then as soon as the bill passed the House of Representatives, with a veto override majority, by the way, they just unleashed this fury of just angry, horrible, just awful people saying horrible, awful things to try to kill the bill and they're like, you better be scared and you better be intimidated. What woman really wants to go through that?
You said a little earlier when you went around to try to talk to groups that a lot of the cisgendered women didn't want to show up,
right,
because of this fear of reprisal, right? And I can see that. I can see what happens. I can see, like I've been on Twitter for a while, and I can see the vitriol.
Yes.
That happens when you happen to be in a position where you're not complying to the correct mode of thinking.
Oh, yeah.
And I use quotes around that, because what is the correct mode of thinking? I mean, it's this leftist agenda that I think is troubling. It's troubling to me. It makes me feel sad for the future of our country, really.
Yeah.
And and I can see why a lot of women just didn't show up. And that story about your intern, I can see why you took down the video.
Yeah.
Because you get in a position where you say, I really don't want these people to be a target.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the sad thing is for me, I will debate a policy all day, every day with anyone. We can disagree. One of my favorite thing is to pick a policy discussion and then just debate it, take a different view and debate it. It's just, it's fun if you can actually maintain your composure and stick to the issue and not go personal. But that's a dying art, I guess, in our society, because you have to just attack them personally. You have to go after their family. You have to just be as vile, frankly, as you possibly can, conjure up.
Well, their wokeness is a religion, and you're attacking their religion.
I suppose
you know
that's
what
true.
I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest problem, because religious issues are really hard to, you're so emotionally tied to it that it's hard to have a conversation. But I love having conversations.
I agree.
I'm glad you're willing to come and talk about this, because this is a hard issue.
It's not going to go away.
So what do we do going forward? We probably only need 4 votes in the Senate.
4 or
to
5 in the
shift.
House. Mm-hmm.
And in the House, actually, you're probably there, aren't you? Or
Pretty close.
yeah. So yeah, it'll be interesting. You know, a lot of times people use this idea that, and bill passed with a supermajority, so therefore it's veto proof. No, it's not really veto proof. The governor could still veto it, and those people, when they come back, they have to think, am I so tied to this
Right.
that I'm not going to listen to the veto, right?
Right.
What does the governor know that I don't know, right? But I think in Utah,
Yeah.
we're on the right side of this issue.
No,
I
I surveyed, as I think many of the legislators did, voters on this issue before the session even began. And for the last 2 years, it's been overwhelmingly, and it's how you phrase the question. If you say a transgender girl, people are like, is that someone that was a girl that's transitioning to boy? They're not really sure
Right.
what you mean. But if you say someone that is a biological boy or identified as a boy at birth, do you think they should play on a girl's team? 70 to 80%? No, they shouldn't. They should be loved and they should be cared for, but they shouldn't play on a girl's team. It's just very simple to them.
Yeah, boy, our governor has put himself into quite a quandary the last few weeks, because I've seen so many things all across the nation going after him, right?
And I think there's that fine line between wanting to have a big heart and wanting to have compassion, but also recognizing if you're not in the industry. Like, I'm not going to walk in and try to make decisions for healthcare. I hate when healthcare bills come before the legislature. So I'm trying to understand this the best I can and talk to people in the industry to understand it. And with sports, if you don't actually show up and know what goes on, it would be hard to make a decision on this because you don't see the impacts of it. You don't actually understand the process.
That's why you are the perfect person in the legislature to deal with it.
Well, I think as an official, as a coach, as a parent, as a woman, I understand the process and I know the implications. And I've said it so many times, but it's not compassionate to do nothing, because all it's going to take is one transgender girl to show up and be successful. And the transgender community is always saying, oh, they don't mind if we're there as long as we're not successful. Well, guess what? When you are successful in Utah, if this bill doesn't pass and it doesn't make an override pass or the governor vetoes it, if you are successful, what we've seen so far is nothing. I can't imagine the narrative around Leah Thomas being the narrative around a 16-year-old kid in our state. Let's say there's a 16-year-old transgender swimmer who gets in the pool and just blows them out like Leah Thomas did, which is very, very possible in our state. What's the narrative going to be? They're going to judge that kid, her body, her structure, her speed. When did she transition? Did she go through puberty? Everything is going to be questioned, just like we see with Leah Thomas. And now we're talking about a 16-year-old versus a 20-something-year-old adult. That's not compassionate.
And this bill is about high school sports, right?
Correct. And so we've got to actually be measured, but we need to actually act. It's just how it is. And so, people can say what they want and think that I am whoever they want to say that I am. I don't care. I know who I am. The girls that I coach know who I am. The people that I've officiated for, they know who I am. I care about this because I care about kids. I've taken care of a lot of kids as a mother of 6 and a foster parent, someone who owned a daycare center. I've taken care of a lot of kids in my lifetime. If we really care about kids, we don't sit back and just let this issue explode and be reactive. We get in front of it, and you take the hits and you take the arrows because it's the right thing to do.
Well, and see, that's one of the things that I've really thought a lot about. I mean, this, when you think about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness really talks about public virtue.
Yeah.
Right? And what does that really mean? Well, you have to have a sense on what's right and wrong.
Right.
Right? And it's interesting how these boundaries get blurred. But what I like about what you've done is that you're doing the right thing. Right?
I do.
And that's admirable. Despite all of the arrows that are slung at you and the nasty things that are written on Twitter or wherever, right?
Right.
fact, that's a place where, you know, they'd kill your mother and you know, bury her. And I don't know. It's just a weird. It's just a weird environment.
Because you can be a fake person. You can create a fake profile on Twitter, so you can say whatever you want behind some disguise. And so and then they'll throw things out there about you, and you're like, you can't even be sincere about who you are, and yet you're going to come attack me because I'm doing something.
Yeah.
The keyboard warriors are at their worst on Twitter.
Yeah. And you know, but what's cool to me in watching this whole process and watching you in this process is that we need more people that are willing to stand up and say, no, this is what I believe, and you don't have to believe the same way as me,
right?
But I'm going to do something about it,
right?
And so that's an interesting thing.
Yeah. There's a lot of work to do in so many areas, and you know, I get pegged as a sport legislator, but it's not about sports as much as it is about equality for women.
Yeah.
Let's be honest about, you know, we saw in the NCAA the boys' athletics, you know, opportunities and exercise rooms and all of that versus what the girls were getting. We saw their swag bags, the boys versus the girls. There's a lot of issues there that can and should be addressed, because still to this day, women are just, they're not seen as equal when it comes to so many things. And if we want to change that tide, we need to give women the leadership opportunities that they can learn and grow from when they play sports. We always say on our team, it's not about basketball, it's about life. And what we learn here and the things we do prepares you for life.
Right. Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Well, we're out of time. I appreciate you coming by. I think that people that watch this can have a better understanding of you and where you're coming from. And I think that's the crucial conversation, right?
And I hope they understand the process. The process wasn't last minute.
Right.
It really wasn't. I mean, it was, the idea of bringing it all together was last minute, but all of these ideas, all these thoughts had been discussed and pitched for years. And we just finally were like, this is how we can do this well. This is how we can do it right. And good policy is good policy despite bad politics.
You know, and I can say from someone that was in these discussions in the Senate that I think people were very deliberate, right? Mm-hmm. There was quite a discussion about what do we do, right? What is the right thing to do? And you know, I think we made the right choice.
I do too.
So what can parents do right now?
Well, right now they could reach out to Governor Cox, ask him not to veto it. They can also reach out to their representatives who voted no and share their views and share their thoughts. I think, you know, I understand a lot of people don't want to get on social media and write things that they could get targeted for, that could be shared with their employer, and they could be seen as, you know, discriminatory. But they could certainly call their representative, whether it's the legislator in the House or the Senate. Reach out to them if they voted no. And if they voted yes, thank them. Because you know as well as anyone, when you vote yes, man, people just think the worst of you, and that you somehow lack compassion and that you somehow want to harm kids. And so I think parents that are supportive,
especially on an issue like this,
parents who are supportive of it, thank the legislators who voted yes, and reach out to the legislators that voted no, and just try to have a good conversation with them.
That's probably their best opportunity, right? If your representative or your senator voted against this, call and ask them why. Yeah. And tell them that you really don't want this to get overridden by the governor.
Agreed. That'd be great. Thanks so much, John.
Hopefully we can do that. Yeah, thank you. And we'll see you guys next week.